My name is Chris Frueh, and I will be hosting. Talent War Group is an organization of experts who share their lessons learned and insights on talent management, leadership, and organizational development. We rely on your growing support and wouldn't be here without it. If you like what you hear, please share it with your connections and your contacts. If you have questions and comments, please send them through the chat function, and we will do our best to address them during today's session. All right, so today, kissing the demon, reaching peak performance. And that's what we're here to talk about, is performance. And I'm going to just lead with this idea that performance is a very, very broad domain. It can include performance on a specific job, performance on a specific mission or project, can include performance within your own home and your family and your health. So today we're going to talk about how to identify and kiss your inner demon. The demon, obviously, is an analogy for the internal fears, negativity, and paralysis that impair our ability to perform under pressure or adversity. Today, we're going to talk about how to get the most out of your talent and to help others do the same. All right, so my name is Chris Frueh. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii. I'm also a speaker and contributor with the Talent War Group and performance specialist with Gray Ghost Solutions. I have almost 30 years of professional experience working with military veterans and active duty personnel as a clinician, researcher, and more recently as a performance coach, working within the special operations community. And I'm really excited about today's topic and the very incredible panel we have today. These guys are my friends, and they're all highly decorated combat veterans from the U.S. Special Operations community. So I want to do introductions now. Aric Gray. I'm going to introduce Aric. He's a very good friend of mine and my boss at Gray Ghost Solutions. So, hey, boss. He is an expert in crisis management, government relations, and medical contingency operations. And he's conducted sensitive operations around the world for decades. He's been recognized as a leader in frontier medicine, providing crucial insights to corporate entities, government institutions, and nonprofits. He's deployed operationally to over 50 countries around the globe. Aric served within the United States Army Special Forces as a Green Beret. In the Special Forces, he served as a counterterrorism and direct action expert, completing the Special Forces Advanced Reconnaissance, Target Analysis, and Exploitation Techniques, Special Operations Sniper, and Ranger schools. After 25 years in the Army, Aric retired and joined the U.S. State Department, where he held the role of Director for Protective Medicine, where he was responsible for all medical components serving the Foreign Service, consulates, and embassies worldwide. Before founding Gray Ghost Solutions, he spent 2 years at Banyan Risk Group, serving as Managing Director, leading the global headquarters in Houston, Texas. Aric holds a master's degree from George Washington University and a bachelor's from Campbell University. And he's our guest of honor today. Next, I want to introduce my good friend Dan Luna, who's a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, graduated with BUDS Class 228, served with SEAL Team 1, and then with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. In addition to serving 20 years in the military, Dan spent 2 years at the U.S. Naval Academy delivering competency-based leadership training. His passion for leadership has directed him to a highly focused academic path, resulting in his bachelor's in organizational leadership from the University of Charleston, executive master's of leadership and graduate leadership coaching certification from Georgetown University, and currently a doctoral student at the University of Southern California in organizational change and leadership. Since his retirement in 2018, Dan has started his own company, Team 3LX, and published the first of many in a guided journal series with Ballast Books, Leading from Within. Next up is Joshua Johnson, who's the Director of Training and Leadership Development for West Shore Home. Before that, he served in the U.S. Army Special Forces for 32 years. He served in the 1st Special Forces Group. His area of operations was Asia, but he also completed 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and served in an exchange position with the Australian Special Air Services Regiment. And then last, but certainly not least, Fran Racioppi is the founder of FRSix, where he brings organizational change management through leadership development, team building, and coaching in talent management and operational efficiency. Before FRSix, he was CEO of the Genius Fund and also Director of Global Security for Snapchat. He served 13 years in U.S. Special Forces as a Green Beret, with 3 tours to Iraq and 2 years coordinating special operations combating terrorist organizations throughout Africa. All right, so this is an amazing panel of performance experts who have confronted many, many demons in the course of their illustrious careers. All right, so who is your demon? Let's pause for a minute on that. Before I turn it over to the panel, I want to just make a few remarks to frame our conversation. So the demon is an analogy for the internal fears, negativity, and paralysis that impair our ability to perform under pressure or adversity. We're going to talk about how to get the most out of your talent and how to help others do the same. So who is your demon? Let's pause for a minute on that question. She or he, and I don't know its pronouns, is that nasty little fiend inside you who wants to see you fail. It was spawned by fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, negativity and pessimism, guilt or shame, bad habits, destructive habits, memories of past failures, memories of past traumas, and so on. And I'll even throw in there personality traits, such as antisocial, narcissistic, Machiavellian personality traits, which most of us have to some degree, and it's a matter of figuring out how to maintain control and get the most out of those traits. So how do we identify our demons? Where do we start? Certainly you can take inventory. You probably already have some awareness yourself of your demons. You can get evaluated by a professional of whatever stripe seems to make most sense. You can train with a coach, an expert, a therapist, and there's experiential pathways. Sometimes we call these crucibles. All right. What do you do about it? I'm just going to say my model, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel here for a moment. But let me just talk about my model. I think of behaviors, emotions, cognitions, our thoughts, the biology of who we are and what's going on in our bodies and our biological systems, and then our spirituality. And I think of all of these domains as being tightly interconnected. If you have a problem develop in one area, it will spread to other areas and create potentially a vicious cycle. And that's the bad news. The good news is that each of these areas also provides us with an actionable target point of entry into this system. So for example, if we change some simple behaviors, that will have a ripple effect to affect emotions and thoughts and even biological feelings. So with that introduction, I want to turn it over to Aric Gray. Tell us some of your thoughts. Tell us a little bit about how you view performance and managing or kissing our demon. Aric, over to you.
Thank you for having me, Chris, the rest of the panel. It's just great to be amongst a great group of professionals. Just listening to your introduction, Chris, I was trying to, just think about how do we view that within ourselves. And so, for me, I have to take that back to, I was born the son of a sharecropper. No, it is more about how I was raised in my childhood, how I actually look at a problem set and basically figure out what that solution is going to be, as you were talking about. And so when it comes to Aric's demon is really truly about him. They say a lot of times that, you're your own worst enemy. And I can attest to that. There's all these different things that you play in your head. Look at me. It's, I'm not one of those folks who will sit there and say, well, I'm a black man in America, or I'm this or that. I wasn't raised that way. But it's still there, right? So when I talk to different people, it is, how is the rest of the world going to view me? It is, am I giving 120% every time? It's one of the things that I told my son growing up. If you have to pause when you ask yourself if you gave 100%, you probably didn't. And so it starts with yourself, but then how far do you push that demon? Do you over exercise it to the point to where you actually are of no value to other folks. And so that's what I would say, starting within yourself, realizing what is the truth, because sometimes we tend to be very easy on ourselves for those who don't really like to push the envelope. And so if you can really look within yourself and figure out, what it is that's holding you back, get rid of that action, find a way to actually do the job the best that you can. That's probably the beginning of also helping others. I would leave it over to the other panelists to speak on it if they would like.
Apologies. Something that Fran and I were talking about a few days ago. So we'll go to Fran on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Chris and Aric. I mean, great points on the personal effort piece. And so when I talk about inner demons, when I think about these things that Chris talked about, it's the fear, negativity, shame, guilt, and these overwhelming emotions that require doing something that we in special operations forces used to call embracing the suck. That's achieved because achieving peak performance is hard, physically, mentally, emotionally. The difference between the top 1% of performers and the remaining 99% is that the top 1% think about fear, negativity, pain, hurt, the risk of failure. They accept that it's there, and then they consciously disregard it. So I was a collegiate Division I athlete on the men's rowing team at Boston University. And I would argue that there are few, if any, other sports that can bring the human body to a complete state of failure so quickly and in such a state that competitive rowing does. Physically, lactic acid fills all of your muscles. Oxygen's harder to find with every single stroke as your body is basically falling over in the seat every time you go up and down the slide. Water splashes you in the eyes, your hands bleed on the oar. Emotionally, there's a coxswain who sits in the back and you feel like that person is doing nothing and adding dead weight, and all they're doing is yelling at you, telling you to go faster and telling you that you're not good enough. And then in your peripheral vision, you see your competition. And every time you put that oar in the water and you pull on it and your hands hurt and your body hurt, you're getting instant feedback to see how you're doing and see if you're doing good enough, or are you failing with each stroke and each time you're moving that oar. And mentally, you have to intake all these stressors while you have to maintain this precision timing in unison with 7 other people. Body position on a sliding seat, an oar that operates on a 4-dimensional plane and does exactly what your hands and body tell it to do. And then you have to generate an equal or greater amount of pressure to everybody else sitting in the boat at the same time for the duration of the race. And so everything in your mind and body is telling you to quit this event from the moment it starts, the instant that it says go. It's too hard. It's too painful. You can't keep this intensity for 5-6 minutes or 20 minutes in the fall season. And 99% of collegiate athletes will spend an entire race consumed with this thought process, this pain, this hurt, and this fear that if they push themselves too hard, their body will quit. Their timing will be off. They'll make a mistake. They'll be embarrassed. They'll lose the race. But there's the 1% of these folks who know that all these factors don't matter, that, yeah, it can happen, but it doesn't matter. And they make the conscious decision to not care about their body quitting or taking a bad stroke or being embarrassed in front of their teammates, their coaches, their competition. Because this top 1%, they try to get their body to fail because they understand that the process to achieve success requires this pain, requires that their legs, back, and arms seize from lactic acid shock. Their vision clouds from lack of oxygen. Their brain zones out and forgets about the screaming coxswain, or the distractions that are around them with their competition. That pain is temporary. They understand that. And they know that the moment they stop, it's going to be over. 5 minutes after the race, you don't even realize that you actually had all this pain in your body. And so failure, it no longer becomes an option, because they have nothing else to give. They've left it all there. There's no regrets. There's no saved rounds for later. They don't care that they may fail because they have to get to that position to, if they even stand a chance for success. And that's when they reach true peak performance. This top 1%, they become Olympians, they become champions. And I'll tell you, me included, the rest of us, we just rode in college.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to follow a story like that, but I just wanted to shift this conversation a little bit towards any of our viewers that are, getting ready to exit the military and trying to enter into the civilian world. Look, we come with a ton of demons, right? All sorts of things that are building up inside of us. And it comes from the fact that a lot of us have become very institutionalized. I spent 30 plus years in the military, and 20 of those in special forces. You get very tribal. When you're on an ODA, that's your world. Everyone outside of that ODA is a quasi enemy. They're always trying to make life harder for you. But then you grow in your positions, and you start to see a greater perspective on what the mission set is, and how the individual ODA or the individual special forces team is a part of a bigger problem. And then you just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then suddenly you're no longer part of that process. And you've got to take everything that you have learned towards a very specific skill set and try and find a way to translate that into the civilian world. Super tough, right? Any of us that have gone through it or are currently going through it absolutely understand that. It all comes down to that resiliency, that same level of resiliency that you built up. Fran talked about in that rowing, digging himself through those 5 or 6 minutes. Is the same type of resiliency that you're going to have to apply as you start going out and looking for, life outside of the military. You're going to get knocked down, just like when you went through selection, just like when you went through BUDS, just like when you went through any of the combat operations that lasted far longer than you wanted them to go through. You're going to get knocked down. But that same level of intensity that you brought to everything you've done while you're in the military, that same level of intensity that you have seen, athletes go through, is the exact same mentality that you have to have when it comes to challenging yourself in a new way, right? Chris talked a little bit about, having that good life balance, going in between professional and spiritual and personal. Absolutely, right? You've still got to be able to dig into hard things to keep yourself hard, right? Iron sharpens iron, and you got to put yourself against it. But professionally, you have to approach this in an all new way, and it's all about changing tribes. Eventually, it's going to happen. You're going to find the company that you're going to want to work for, and you're going to find your ideal job. Hopefully, like me, that happened right off the bat. Just got picked up by West Shore Home. Those guys are fantastic. I immediately bought into that tribe, and I couldn't be happier there. But that's not going to be the case for everyone. People are going to have to find that new tribe. And when they do it, when they do find them, it's going to be this fantastic thing. Everything that you learned through your time in the military is going to apply over. It seems challenging to understand that as you're going through the transition. But once you get in there, you start realizing that it's about the relationship. Same way as you had to build your relationships with your ODA, same way you have to build relationships with partner forces, conventional units, sister services. That's what life in the civilian world is. It's just, in my case, you replace talking about guns and bombs and parachuting. You do it with showers, baths, doors, and windows. But the mentality is still the same. Thanks.
Dan, do you have a nugget of wisdom?
Hopefully. So what's cool about being part of this and also being an observer and just listen to everyone talk, Chris, you know me well, so of course I go off script. So I could share a story, a personal story, and I think the theme would go with everyone else, that internal voice, and I name that voice of self-doubt. So to have that internal voice of self-doubt really follow me throughout my whole life. And then just really shelving that voice and moving past that voice of self-doubt and whatever that was, whether it was, in the SEAL teams, making it through buds, before that through sports, even moving up in the teams to other levels, and just really shelving that voice of self-doubt and letting somebody else tell me no. Like, hey, don't tell yourself you can't do this. Let somebody else, let them kick you out type thing, or disqualify you. So it's interesting, Chris, and what you shared, and I loved what you shared, and we've had many conversations. And so in the framework that I use as now a leadership coach with executive clients is observer. And so everything that you shared, and as we're talking about the individual, it's really the observer. And then outside of that is the action and the results. So really just simplifying framework. And so for even in this conversation, like, hey, what's simple framework that the viewers can take away right away? And so to take what you said, behaviors, emotions, thoughts, biology, spirituality, I would bucket that in the observer, and then really look at actions and results. And so, and you even added the triad of personality. And so, I think it was Josh that was just talking about tribe. And so really when you meet somebody, you're meeting their personality or that observer, and then you're also meeting the cultural background in which they came from or that they're currently in. So is this framework for the individual to take in, how does that mean for their now peak performance, both for an individual, team, or organization, and how do you maximize that? And so what I use with my clients is really that of reflection. And so reflection means to deeply consider. So when you say reflection, people often think in the past, like, oh, I'm thinking about the past, which is true. You can also deeply consider the present. Right? And so there's reflection. So the academic term for it is reflection on action. That's in the past. The present is reflection in action. And then you can actually deeply consider the future. We have different language that we typically use for that. But that's also a reflection in the future. And so for leaders to reflect, and now what we're specifically talking, peak performance and these fears, and whether it's fear, shame, guilt, pain, it's basically some form of suffering, right? So if we're just create a big bucket, put all that language in there, it's some version of suffering that's happening internal. And so as we continue to talk about this, we're now thinking about thinking, so metacognition, which now leads to my point of reflection. So wherever that happened, typically someplace in the past, we can now reflect about it. And so for leaders, or really, and sometimes people get caught up in that word leaders, really for individuals as they make decisions about themselves. So they're leading themselves. So in a sense, everyone is a leader. So as they make those daily decisions, I typically challenge leaders of, well, what does your leadership training look like? What is your leadership program? What does your leadership workout look like? And typically I'll ask somebody like, hey, do you work out or do some form of exercise? They're like, yeah, 3 days a week. And I try and do this, and that. So I'm like, okay, that's great. What does your leadership workout look like? And so through that talk track, I'll walk them through of, hey, a real easy practice to start is a practice of reflection. And so experience is not the master educator. It's what you do with that experience. And so through implementing a practice of reflection, and so more specific, thinking about your own thoughts. So when that voice of negativity shows up of, oh, you can't do this, or, this is going to happen, however that voice shows up, to where you're now able to track it and then now pause and decide what you want to do with it. And so really implementing a practice of pause, and I saw a question that came up, a bias for action. Okay, well, implementing a practice of pause within your reflection. So what does reflection mean? And I'll pause after this. Real simple framework once again. And I like framework and I like models, real simple models, because it's it's now a formula for teaching. And now having these formulas and models, people can take and use them right away. So a reflective practice is a what, a so what, and a now what. And the first thing in the what is to now pause and like, hey, what do I want to think about? So if it's like, hey, I'm noticing a bias for action, or I'm noticing this voice of negativity, well, pause. And now what do you want to do with that? And so it just creates space for now greater choice within your decision making. And I'll go ahead and pause there.
Thank you, Dan. That's excellent. And in fact, you sort of, in talking, you began to anticipate this question. And I'm gonna put the question out here and then reference what you just said. So we got this excellent question from Lisa Jaster. How do you overcome the bias for action? How do you overcome the bias for action that can detract from peak performance if you are not comfortable taking the required tactical pause? And Dan just talked a little bit about that pause, that reflection. I want to give Fran a chance to respond to the question, and then I want to give Aric a chance to respond. Fran?
All right. Yep. Thanks, Chris. So I would break this up into two sections, right? And I think that Dan did a great job discussing this tactical pause and this need to kind of stop and think, right? How am I reflective in the moment to understand what comes next? And so that what comes next is that bias for action. And what are the things that are now preventing me from taking action in whatever direction that needs to be? One of the things that the Talent War Group talks a lot about, we talk about it every session, I tend to bring it up a lot, we write about it, is it's in the book, The Talent War, right? What are the 9 characteristics or traits of high potential talent? And so I would tie this bias for action back to those 9. And I would say, what do you need to exude in that moment to reach peak performance? And so, drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, effective intelligence, team ability, curiosity, emotional strength. You're going to have to pull from one or more of those in that moment to move forward, right? If it's drive, you have a need for achievement, to grow, to be better than you were yesterday, and self-improvement, right? Is it resiliency? You face a challenge and you have to show perseverance. Is it adaptability? You have to adjust your behavior to the situation because what you're doing is not working. Is it humility, where you have to take a step back and say, maybe the problem's me. I don't have all the answers. I need to go find someone else. I need to be a willing learner. I need to have that self-awareness to stand up and say, maybe someone can do this better. Or integrity. Is what you're doing right? Is it legal? Are your actions and words aligned with that? You have an effective intelligence. Have you experienced this in the past? And do your own experiences and knowledge come into play here, where you've seen this before in some way? Now you can apply that. Is it a team situation where people may be putting themselves ahead of the team, and that needs to be reversed to have team success because the sum is greater than the individual parts? Is it curiosity? You just haven't asked the right questions. You're approaching something in the same manner that you always have, and it's just not working. And maybe we have to take a different angle on it. Or finally, is it emotional strength that you need just because the totality of the situation is weighing on you? Everything is on your mind and you're unfocused, but you have to take a deep breath. You have to think about that. You have to think with clarity and then solve to move forward. And so I think if you can look at those 9 characteristics in that situation, understand what's creating the challenge for you to move forward, pick 1, 2, a few of those, you can start moving those things forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Aric, go to you.
Okay. Fran and what some of the other panel has said, and it just reminds me of a quote from Dale Carnegie, which basically just talks about people who accomplish things, they didn't get there from lack of trying. Usually it was just, when they saw no hope at all, it was how, they continue to find that answer. They continue to find a way to press through. And so that's what we do. And so when Fran was also mentioning, have you seen that before? Have you done that before? One of the things in the SOF community is just kind of that redundancy. the master the basics, the putting yourself through different planning scenarios. And that doesn't mean it's always about, if you're a person who does security and you're continually doing battle drills. It could be the same thing for a corporate infrastructure where, take what we've just done with COVID and having to shift everyone to home and running through those planning scenarios and running through that. The biases and things like that, those things will also, I believe, be worked out when you actually have the opportunity to sit back and actually look at all those different aspects and anything that could come up, whether that is in an operational environment and operationally, whether that's, security, medical, or any of those things, all the way to the corporate America. So some of the things, that I think about with that is what we term like a 0 week. And so 0 week for me comes back for those that have been to Ranger School, that did the 0 week where you start off and you get all these things ready, you get prepped a little bit before the rest of the people get there. I've also changed that to what we do at Grey Ghost, and Chris knows what I'm talking about with this. It's really just taking a look at the individual and the team and the true executive suite concept. And that basically, one of the other things that I've gotten out of that, and so Dr. Sean Mulvaney, who a lot of people may know, also when we would do things out for people in selections and things like that, and we would be talking about, for example, a person gets injured and we want to give them a Motrin or Tylenol or something like that. And the majority of people would say, well, that's going to enhance their ability. No, it's not really going to enhance their ability, because at the end of the day, everyone showed up in their peak performance that they had for themselves. We're really just trying to bring that person back to 0. And that's the whole thing about 0 week. You have all these peak performers. You talk about when Fran was saying, the 99% and the 1%. Well, in order for everyone to basically get to that extent, and sometimes you need to bring that person back down to 0. You bring your whole team down to 0. And then you start to build on all those processes. That'll help with the biases. That'll help with the pregnant pauses. And just like Mr. Luna said, it really is, you create that pause within your thought process. And so that's kind of how we look at it, by bringing the folks to 0 week, doing the analysis, basically getting with the leaders, figuring out, should this person be doing this task or are they better on other tasks? And then we continue to move forward. And I believe that's one of the ways we can kind of at least tamp down when we have those biases and what makes us stop instead of continue to move.
So all of these thoughts, it seems like there's a central theme that each of us have touched on, which is there's something deep within each of us that really, really, really doesn't want to be uncomfortable. And that's one of my demons. I don't like to be uncomfortable. And I will go out of my way and do things to avoid that discomfort at times. So, but it seems like what we're all saying is there's part of the perspective here is that you're not going to get to peak performance without enduring some discomfort along the way. So let me ask this question, and I'm going to just throw this out to the panel. What are your thoughts on modern perspectives on stress and adversity? It seems like we live in a society now that's driven largely by a medical model that pathologizes distress, and we put a premium focus on safety and protecting younger people. Thoughts on modern perspectives related to stress and adversity in the context of what we're talking about here? Who'd like to take this?
I can jump on this right quick. That's such a good question, because it boils down to some of the problems that we have that we had in special operations, just in finding talent to fill our ranks. We've seen a shift away in our youth from going outside and playing sports, and people concerned about football and wrestling. Everyone's going to get hurt, and then when we ask them to go do grown-up things, they don't have bone density in order to do the job on the battlefield. And so I think that's an immediate translation over, right? We've seen plenty of our folks that have gotten ready to retire or they're in the process of retiring, and they give up on some of the daily habits that made them very successful in the military. Getting out and getting after some good hard physical exercise in the morning, doing something hard periodically throughout the week. Just all these things that made them very successful in the military. They have the opportunity to take a break, take a breather, realize it's not as mandatory anymore. But I'll tell you, it is, because the minute you let off that gas, you're going to find yourself coasting, and it becomes really easy to continue to coast.
Josh, thank you for that. I have kind of have some interesting thoughts on that, and I'm trying to. I think it was maybe Fran or even Josh earlier when you said the word resilience. What I think's interesting, whether it's military or corporate, whatever that transition is from youth to adulthood into the organization that they're going into, they'll learn habits from the culture, right? So if the culture that they're entering in, whether there's some rite of passage, so for the military, if there's boot camp or even at the Naval Academy, they have different processes to move folks through, or even in corporate, if there's education that's involved, whatever that hardship or that thing that must be done for them to make it into their group. Sometimes we teach hardship, and a lot of times I'll, as I'm on social media going through things, there's a lot of rhetoric out there of like, push through and endure the pain and like keep going and, grit it out. And yes, that's true. And Chris, just like you and I have had multiple conversations about trauma and stress, that is, everything's multifactorial and a spectrum. So that is a part of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is the resilient side, which actually means to bounce back, to move back to wholeness. And it's interesting, both in academia and just in general, resilience is used both to like push through and endure, and then also to move back to wholeness. Well, which one is it? Are we pushing or are we pulling? Because those are two different things. So in a lot of my work, I work through really like navigating the distinction of that. Hey, it's actually not pushing through. That's hardiness, that's persevering, that's grit. That's a lot of other words that we already have in our language to describe the push. The pull, moving back to wholeness or a reset point or taking a break, right? So as we're enduring something, even the metaphor that was used with rowing. Hey, so the voice in the head was saying, hey, this isn't going to last very long. Keep going, ignore it. But then after you ignore it, there's a period of time that that pain has gone away. And so just like working out, I may work out for an hour. I'm not working out for 24 hours. I'm working out for an hour. And then the 23 hours, well, there's sleep, there's nutrition, there's there's other physical factors that are very important to make sure when I show up the next day, I can perform. So I think that is missed. So sometimes we hit this like, hey, we're not tough enough and we need to be tougher. And there might be a version of that. And sometimes that's trained. And then on the other side of the spectrum, hey, if somebody's really like going through it and crushing themselves, hey, what they may need to be taught or what they might need to learn is, hey, how do you relax? How do you take it easy? What is moving back to wholeness? What's shelving work? What are those hobbies? What are these other practices that you might be able to implement in your life? And I'll pause there.
Aric, you want to enlighten us a little bit? I think you're going to need to unmute your phone.
So given what all the other panelists have said and thinking it through, I'm going to be a little bit of the devil's advocate on the, and Chris, you and I have talked about this on, resiliency and what is pushing too much, what is not pushing enough, and how do we figure those things out, and how do we get to a point to where we know when that is. And so, I haven't been in the transition world that long. I would say that I had a gradual transition by understanding the State Department, then going to work for Banyan, and then now running G2. But the way I see it is, as we get older and we get different, we look at things in a different way. Parents are no longer basically, the things that happened to us when we were children that were not that big of a deal, where your mom and dad made you go outside so that you could, get some fresh air and get some exercise. The things where we didn't just let our kids stop playing the violin or things like that, or stop playing sports because they just didn't have a good day. We still need some of those things. We even as an adult, just because something may not necessarily be going easy for you, you doesn't mean that that's something that you should give up on. You need that experience. It's kind of like, some others before me have said in special operations, just because you graduated the Q course doesn't make you special. It is going through all the different things that you have to do for trial and tribulation. It is basically pushing past those things. Now, you're right. When we go past that and we don't look at things like the physiological effects, which is some of the things that we were thinking about with the 0 week and the mindset, also when you think about the trauma and things like that. Yes, there is a point to where you need to stop, but have you actually reached that point in order for you and your followers or your executives to understand, like, no, we can go a little bit further, but no, at this point, this is where we become a detriment. And I think that is something that's very good in a controlled environment for people to still at least continue to try to do, and not just find your breaking point. Find the point that makes you continue to strive, where you get past that, where you don't hurt yourself. I've had a mentor that I worked for in Mexico. I would watch this gentleman work for about 20 days straight, and then he would just stop and basically not work for 5. Now, not everybody has that ability to do that, but he knew that that was his point. And within those 5 days, he would recoup, regenerate, basically come up with new ideas, and then get back in the shop and start going at it again. No, that's not for everyone. For you, it may be 6 hours of the day you can keep going. It's like some of the, there was a specialist, Brittany Loney, I believe, or something like that, who would say, if you're working in a room with a cubicle and you are not getting up in the middle of the day, then you're missing out on a revitalization. So it may be something as simple as that. Not everyone needs to get up at lunchtime. Some people need to get up at 10:30 and basically take that walk around the office, rejuvenate, think about what you're doing, and sit back down. I'll stop right there.
Okay, thanks, Aric. So I'm going to take this question here from Justin Douglas, and Justin asks, how do you determine when rest is needed versus a need to simply push through? Okay, so I'll back it up to kind of a macro level and think about the fact that today there's this perspective in society where you have to push, you can't stop, where you have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, you have to work out, you have to immediately you have to read for an hour, you gotta go to work, you gotta work all day, you gotta come home, you gotta read for another hour, you have to do some other activity, be involved in a whole bunch of groups, and then you gotta go to bed at midnight. You got to wake up and do it again the next day, and you have to do that 7 days a week, right? And then if your life is supposed to be this upward sloping straight trajectory where every day you wake up and it's better than it was yesterday, and all of a sudden from the day you're born to the day you die, you're the best that you're going to be, and it just looks like this. Well, that's not things like social media, you see it on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, where there's, everybody posts everything that's always going well in their life, but nobody ever posts the things that are going bad. But the reality is that that's not life. That's not your life in totality. That's not your life over the course of a year. That's not your life over the course of a day. It's going to have ups and it's going to have downs, and it's going to be that wave with troughs and with crests. And you have to be able to say and identify to yourself and look introspectively, when am I at a crest and when am I at a trough, and when am I on the upslope and the downslope, and what am I doing today to continue my journey on that path? And if that's up, what do I have to do today to get to the next step that's up? And if you're at the top, how am I going to stay here? And if you're on the downslope, well, you got to start to understand, I'm on the downslope, but this will end if I do certain things. If I'm in the trough, how am I going to get out of here? What changes am I going to make to get back to that upslope? And maybe that's rest. Maybe that's recuperation. Maybe it's not doing anything for 5 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, a week, a month in your life, where you have to sit back and say, right now, I'm exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally, and I cannot get to the next phase unless I take a break, unless I stop, right? And so being able to look at life like that in with reality, that you're going to face ups and downs, and your job is to identify when you're in which part of that cycle, wake up the next day to combat that. That's how you can start to really turn things around and identify, how you're going to get to the next day and achieve that mindset for success.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to give Josh the last word on the discussion, and then we'll come back to me and I'll initiate our wrap up. Josh?
Great, thanks, Chris. Hey, Fran, you bring up a ton of really good points, and I kind of wanted to circle back to Lisa's question, where she talked about that bias for action, and somebody else talked about asked a question about when do I push through and when do I take a break? The reality of it is, taking a break is still action. You may not be moving in the same direction, but you've got all of these little jobs that start to fall off when you're just going and going and going. So talking about some of the physical attributes, rest is part of the trifecta of fitness, and nutrition and just getting all that caught up. But when you're talking about work, you've got all these things that you have put less emphasis on when you're driving towards a specific goal. And if you pause, take a step back, start answering some of those questions that have come up, you'll find yourself in a far stronger position to push through to that next ridgeline. We've seen that in patrolling. You stop at a patrol base and you think, oh, good, I got to take a break and I get some food in my face. But there's automatically priorities of work that have to be done. And you may not be out moving towards your objective, but you're doing all of that little work that you have to do in order to be caught up so you can take that next road. Chris?
All right. Thank you, Josh. Excellent. And thank you all for a really good conversation at this point. We're running short on time. So what I want to do at this point now is just do a quick, give each of you 90 seconds or so to make a final point. And then we'll go to Nayara to help us wrap up. And I'll go first here. In the chat room, in the questions, Paul had a really good question about listening to your body. And I think that's something we haven't actually said those exact words here in the last 10 minutes, but it seems to be what we've been talking about. And so just to kind of piggyback on to where Josh left off, I think rest is critically important. In my work, I usually start with sleep. So that listening to your body, understanding your biological rhythms, and maximizing sleep, not just quantity of sleep, but quality of sleep, is so critically important for everything else. And part of my view is if you can get the sleep right, everything else is going to be formed around that in a manner that's effective and works. So that's my wrap. Aric, let me go over to you next.
I would say as well, thanks for having me again. I would say to wrap up, it's really about getting yourself back to zero. It's about trying to find the exact things that help you in your daily process. Try a few different things. I agree with the sleep. I also agree with the mental cognition so that you can get your mind right. I'm a person with, OCD, CDO. And so for me, I have to have things in a specific way before I can start to do that task for the day. But I've also learned how to put those in different orders because sometimes you just can't go, A to Z. And so I would say find that, try a few different things, and then talk to someone who may be able to help coach you in some sort of way.
Dan.
You said my favorite word, Aric, coach. So as a leadership coach, I ask a lot of questions. And so really the questions that I would ask for the viewers next is, what does your current leadership practice look like? And something, if I can make a recommendation, to implement a practice of reflection. So after this conversation, to go ahead and reflect. And real easy framework for reflection is the what, the so what, and the now what. And so the what was, this conversation. The so what was like, well, what did you take away from it? And then the now what, and that's kind of the challenge that I want to put out there. The now what is, hey, after listening to this, what does next look like for you? What's something that you took away from this, and how can you implement that into your current practice or implement it into your life?
Thanks, Dan. Josh.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit on this panel. I've got 3 pages of notes, and I was a panel member, so I appreciate everything that was put out there. I just want to end with one quote, and I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit. Nelson Mandela said, "I either win or I learn." We're all going to get knocked down. We've all got things that we're afraid of. We've all got things that slow us down. But learn what you can from every time you come across that. It's not easy, right? There's so many things that we have to do professionally that challenge us every day. And sometimes you're not going to be at your best, but learn from it, pick up, and re-attack that hill. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Fran?
Josh, I love that quote because to me that's what I call the no option. If you can adopt a mindset where there is no option to quit, then that mindset combats fear. We started this conversation talking about fear, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, the fear of failure, the fear of pain, it doesn't matter. If you approach every day and everything that you do with this mindset that I have no option to quit, and regardless of the result, I'm going to win or I'm going to learn, and that learning piece is going to set me up to win later, then you are on the right track to find success in whatever you do. And what I will also say to all of our listeners is that these have been great conversations for us. We've learned from everybody who's contributed through the chat function, asked our questions, engaged with us, and I really appreciate those opportunities to learn those. And I think that collectively as a group, everybody who's been involved in this learns and has that no option mindset every single day. So I appreciate that very much.
All right. So thank you to the panel. And now I want to go over to Nayara for the lightning round summary of what did you get out of what are the main takeaways that you have to share back with us?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm humbled by this conversation. It was so great, and I have a lot of main points, but I'm gonna stick through some. And firstly, the main point was from you, Chris, when you asked the audience, what is your demon? And how to identify your demons. Your internal demon is all of your personal obstacles that hinder you from reaching high performance. However, there is a counteraction in how society behaves nowadays. And sometimes society strives for safety, and being cautious is always important. but you need to experience multiple discomfort moments in your life to learn what it takes to overcome your own demons and then thrive. The second point was from Aric. He quoted that you are your own worst enemy. So it always starts with yourself. Hence, have you really asked yourself if you push through to reach your maximum performance? And do you look into yourself and find what's holding you back? Well, the answer of that was responded by Dan when he said about practicing reflection and self-awareness. Dan talked about how he has had the voice of self-doubt many times throughout his life, and who hasn't, right? He talks about how reflecting is essential to reach peak performance, but people often relate reflection to the past. He gave good insight about how you should reflect your past. That's very important, but you should also reflect about your current actions. When you reflect about what you are doing now, then that is when you can most quickly respond and improve. Dan quoted, "Experience is not that master educator, it's what you do with that experience. Because when you track your past and present, you can pause, reflect, and then understand the what, the so what, and now what." The last main point is from Fran, where he said how you have to embrace the suck. Because once you're thinking on quitting because it is so hard, then there's that 1% of a group of people who know that pain and fear don't really matter. They know that their body and mind might be quitting at that moment, but that moment will end at some point. That will pass. And those 1% of people are the ones who thrive the most because they are ready for that pain. They know that that pain will happen, but they also know that that pain won't be forever. So failure no longer is an obstacle. In fact, there's a famous quote in fitness that a person said, "I only start counting when it starts hurting." So people who understand that obstacle, they understand that they will need to go through that obstacle and overcome that so they can thrive. I would like to wrap up, though, with the concept of resiliency because it came up many times. And resiliency is your ability to adapt and recover from that period of toughness. So many people in the audience asked when to know your time to push through and your time to recover. And unfortunately, as we've seen, there's no one formula fits all. So to be resilient, you need to reflect on yourself. You need to have self-awareness and realize when you're going on that downslope that Fran mentioned, and your job is to identify that and reflect on what resources you should use that work exactly for you so you can rest, reset, and continue to achieving success afterwards. In other words, basically, it's not the end of the world if you stop for a second, reflect, and take action after.
Nayara, thank you very much. That was excellent. Excellent overview, summary. All right, so I want to thank the panel. We're going to call it a wrap for the day. I do have a few more final remarks to make. I hope you'll join us next Tuesday, December 22nd at 1 p.m. Central Time for Talent War Podcast number 12. Title of this one is Speak to be Heard, Not to Talk. And this panel is going to be hosted by Army Ranger School graduate, the amazing Lisa Jaster. We will discuss how to effectively communicate with your peers in a way that they will hear what you have to say. Lisa will be joined by several Talent War group panelists, and I'll be there myself. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. If you like what you heard and want to continue the conversation, connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Share our posts and these sessions with your organizations, connections, family, and friends. If you want to improve yourself, your team, or your organization, any of our team members are available to work directly with you to achieve that success. Also, check out thetalentwar.com and efoverwatch.com to learn more. Thank you very much.